Back to advancing with watercolor in Central Park. We're painting in Central Park this week, doing scenes from Bethesda Terrace today. One of the scenes we did earlier was looking down on Bethesda Terrace. And we finished a painting of a hansom cab coming out of the shadows. This next one features another cab moving into the light. You can see the photos got a different perspective. What you notice immediately in this image is that our hansom cab is in the sunlight. It's receiving a lot of light, and the background is quite dark against it. The shadows and the pavement is quite dark against it. So this gives us a little different dynamic to work with, and a little bit we can do a variation of what we did before with a slightly different approach. It's a good exercise to drive home the importance of structuring your image, thinking about your subject in terms of lights and darks. In this case, I've done a little study again on the iPad, very quick, very loose, with the intent of showing the shadow play upon the hansom cab, but the horses moving into the light, the driver moving into the light, the canopy of the cab also into the light. So this is very much a light motif, a bright motif against a dark background and dark foreground. And this gives me a lot of guidance into how I'm going to shape my watercolor plan. It also gives me some ideas on how to handle the background, foreground, and midground. And those, having this sort of guidance before you start painting to incorporate it into your watercolor plan gives the watercolorist an advantage, because they can already sort of see it in the mind's eye, and the surprises are fewer. The process is a little more straightforward. So I'm starting by painting some of the lighter shadows moving across the hansom cab, identifying my subject. As I mentioned earlier, it's helpful to do this because then we can relate the other elements, the background, for example. We can relate it more clearly to our main figures. The foreground we can relate more clearly to our center of interest, our main figures. I'm stating it early with a sort of pale blue, light cool gray, setting up the profile again of the cab and the horse. You noticed I'm holding the brush by the back, trying to create a liveliness to my brushwork, and saying it with as little as possible, trying to get a feeling of sort of a staccato feeling with the brushwork, because this is how the shadows appear to me, to be really sharp against a light area. And this still gives me flexibility. I can go in certainly with darker passages and exaggerate them, but this gives me a feel for the subject, and certainly a border, an area that I need to cut around when I'm placing the background. The background in my plan is going to really show off the top of the horse, the ears, the feather. It's going to show off the top of the cab driver. Everything else will kind of be in shadow. Certainly the areas below the hansom cab will be in shadow. Certainly a lot of shadows in the foreground leading up to the horse and carriage. So this is very much a sort of an opposite of what we are doing in an earlier painting. This is a light motif in a rather dark mid value, with some strong dark accents to pull the motif out of the shadows. This is my tonal plan. And doing the sketch on my iPad, or a value study on location using a single color, is a great way to proceed your working with any subject, but in this case, in particular with a moving subject. Doing a sketch in a single color gives you an image to work from in your mind's eye, or some guidance as how to structure your washes and think about what your goal is in the painting. I painted the foreground just to give us a feeling of the pavement, the bright parts of the pavement that will later shine through and give a luminosity to the shadows. The shadow play on the horse and buggy is pretty clear. And I can see how dark I need to go in the background, where I need to cut around. This is going to be a challenging wash. Number one, it's a big wash, so I've moved to a larger brush, work with a bit of speed. This video is sped up a bit, so it's making me look actually faster, but my mindset is to get a very broad application quickly, return to it with the spray bottle when I need to, gradually approach the edges of my main subject. And this way I can kind of preserve the wet quality of the wash so that I can work into it again and again if necessary. But I get that the profile of the trees stated quickly, and then I'll start to work into it with deeper hues, darker hues. I will also I'll shift to a smaller brush at some point. I guess I'm doing that now. Shift to a smaller brush, a little darker pigment, really try to get the profile of the horse and carriage, driver, edge of the canopy, all of that stuff with the smaller brush. The quality of the wash that I'm working in is very, very wet, so it's going to allow me to work into this area and still maintain soft edges. So I feel good about adding darks to the background. I feel I can really exploit that in the shadow work. And I'm working with a bluer green in the shadows, trying to affect sort of angled light. Again, working from the back of the brush, trying to be expressive with the brushwork, even though I know it's going to fade quite a bit and dissolve as it dries. Thinking about shaping some of the exposed foliage, getting a nice pattern. Those are my working thoughts, and thoughts which I kind of had in my mind even before I was putting paint to paper. I had an idea, a sequence, and really we can't get that sort of knowledge or that sort of ability through reading a book or watching a video. We get it through experience, and so if nothing else, remember that experience is really helping to shape my decisions and shape my approach to the painting. And experience means there's a lot of, shall we say, unseen paintings in my library, paintings that didn't come out so well. However, I've come to realize, and probably all of you realize it as well, these paintings, the paintings that never see the light of day, that end up in the wood fire, that end up, as smoke, these are the important paintings. Even though they don't pass the test, they give us a lesson that we can't get any other way. They give us information that makes us a better painter in the next painting. So yes, we can say a lot of mistakes, a lot of errors in the painting, but those mistakes lead to clarity. They lead to this experience that I keep referring to. So you can see I've kind of finished off the background. I've gone quite dark against the edge of my motif, all intentional to really make it come out, pop out. I want those sharp edges to really be the first thing you see when you look at the painting. I'm complementing that now I'm trying to devise a beautiful pattern of shadows across the the pavement underneath the horse. This is my working thought. I'm not copying what I see, rather I'm trying to show the angle of the shadows and a beautiful shape. These two things are in my working mind. As I'm thinking about my subject, I'm thinking about a beautiful shape and trying to make that shape lie flat on the ground. So I'm breaking it up with little spaces, dappled sunlight. I'm connecting it to the bottom of the painting, connecting it to both sides so there's sort of an integrity to the shape. The shape itself has an oblique movement which creates energy and also kind of complements the diagonal in the shape of the shadows that's in the background above. So there's a lot of underlying design elements to any one part of the painting, and I'm trying to explain those as they're coming out of my brush. So we return, we'll add a bit of color to the background, but we're going to return to the main motif. It needs to come out now. You can see that it's just a ghost on top of the painting, and we do have some nice shadow play there, but it's time to start to add some darks and bring our subject back into the midground and our main focus, related to what we've done in the background. So a little bit of a reverse process, isn't it? We kind of identified our subject, but then we painted with some clarity and strength the background and the foreground. Now we have to build up our motif to complement or to relate to what we've done in the background. So this sort of back and forth is very common in all of painting, any sort of painting, whether it's pastel, oil painting, acrylic painting, caustic painting. We go back and forth and adjust, and with watercolor it helps to have some sort of plan, though, some sort of thoughts in the beginning to help give you a structure, because a lot is dependent on the sequence. Since it's a transparent media, we have to think about how to layer the painting, how to build it up in layers, or how to structure the washes. If we want softness in any one wash, that almost has to be done early on, because if we do dry technique on top, we're going to get hard edges. So a lot of the sequence in our painting has to be thought through, and a lot of that is determined by what sort of technique we want to use in any one passage, background, foreground, through our motif. We should realize that the value of edges, how edges help bring focus in our painting. This is a good example. You can see how those hard edges really grab and hold the eye. And that will be subdued a little bit as I add washes to it, but it's going to be clear where I want it to be clear, and it'll be vague and suggestive where I want it to be suggestive. The edges are a big part of creating any sort of mood in a painting, and the soft edges that you see in the background, even though there's bold passages, they recede. They move towards the background because of that softness. The hard edges, whether in the head of the horse, the canopy of the cab, some of the highlights on the edge of the cab, grab our attention, hold our attention, and give a focus to the image. So each of these, to derive these different edges, a different technique is necessary, whether we're working on dry paper or wet paper or damp paper. It's going to create a different edge. Whether we're working as the painting's drying, or whether we're adding color to a wet area and letting it dissolve, or dry color on top of dry paper to get a sort of jagged, broken edge. All these things all these types of edges end up representing a different technique to the watercolor artist. Well, the detail is coming into place. A lot of darks on the lower part of the cab to bring it out of the shadows, adding some harness and some decorative elements to the horse, a vest to our driver, details. That's what we're doing now. And yeah, the details are bringing our handsome cab into focus even more so. And we'll continue to place the details until we feel, oh, well, we need to address some other parts of the painting, going back and forth. Even though I'm using this small brush, I think I'd like to point out that I still hold the back. And for those of you who are working on your brushwork, I can really recommend this technique because it ends up that your arm or shoulder starts to drive the brush, a larger muscle group. And athletes will tell you, anybody who's using their body for precise movement will tell you that if you can drive that movement with a larger muscle group, in this case I'm using my forearm, my shoulder, sometimes even my back to create a stroke, you get more precision, you get more energy. If I'm holding it by the tip, it's going to be the very last touches where it's maybe a dot or a tiny line or something like this. But where I'm painting with the brush, typically I feel more in control by holding the back of the brush. And I get, especially in the passages of shadows that you see on the ground, that cannot be done if you're holding the brush by the very end, sort of like we hold a pencil. You really need to get in the habit of holding the brush by the back. In the beginning, it's an uncomfortable posture, but as you work with it more and more, it starts to feel comfortable, and you actually start to feel more control and more spontaneity, more of a disposition towards spontaneity, letting the gesture, our body gesture, dictate the movement of the brush. And again, it's part of that calligraphic mindset. Very important area. Look at those ears. One of the great equestrian painters, Joseph Sabukovic, has often said that you tell a lot of information by the ears. If you get the ears right, he says it's I think 70% of the battle. So I feel good about my horse's ears. It shows that he's looking off in a little different direction. It gives a clear idea of the strength of the horse, the neck and the ears. And the legs, you probably noticed I'm struggling a bit with the legs. I'm putting those in the shadows so they won't be as dominant as the ears, as the back of the horse, as the harness, etc. This is the way we hide the little inaccuracies. We put them into shadows, or we scrub them a little bit to make them soft. There's plenty of inaccuracies in every painting, plenty of strokes that you wish you could do over again. And some of those paintings are in museums. I would wager to say that every artist is going to find those sorts of things they wish they could do again in their painting. Emphasizing the shadows a little more. Here I'm actually subduing some of the brightness, trying to make it a little more of a subtle expression. I found this a preferable way to build up the painting, going from a strong, bold presentation, and as I develop the image and it starts to look finished, I'll muddle some areas. I'll make some areas a little vaguer so that the expression is a little more subtle and not so dramatic or so loud. I'm seeing the painting in sort of has a finished quality, but there's a couple areas that are bothering me, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to resolve that. One of the more bothering passages to me is the upper left-hand corner. It feels a little flat or a little empty, and I can start to think about what I might do to resolve that. I'll have a coffee and look at the painting, turn it upside down, think about possible resolutions. One is I could simply cover it with foliage. Another is I can add another angled shadow to that upper area. But I think since I have such a strength in the cast shadows, I'm going to sort of fix this corner by adding overhead foliage of a darker nature, using splatter, using sort of dancing brushwork to finish this corner in a little more positive aspect. So now by using this dark against the lighter background, we get more of a luminosity in the background. We also get a reason for these shadows that are prevalent on the ground, and we hide that little bit of sky that was bothering me. Who knows why it was bothering me? I guess if I analyzed it long enough, I could give you a complete answer, but it just didn't feel right, and so I looked for a solution to that. And if I don't see a solution, I'll just put the painting on the wall or on the mantle or in front of me and meditate on it. If I don't see it right away, I'm not going to do anything that doesn't make sense to me. If that's what I mean. If it doesn't make sense, I'm not going to add something to the painting. So adding a bit of foliage up there seemed to work in my mind's eye, and now that I see it there, I feel, yeah, it was the right decision. A little more strength in the lower section of the horse, in the lower section of the hansom cab. We'll add some details to that, details of highlights, give the fellow some sunglasses. Look at the pavers. See how those pavers work to give us a little bit of a movement towards the back of the painting. They also make that shadow feel very transparent. This was done with a rigger. I've added some highlights and subdued the red that was in the cab just a little bit. So this is another presentation of the Hansom Cab done with a little bit of a different dynamic in terms of light and dark. Here showing that bright motif against a dark background and against a dark foreground. Hope that was helpful. As always, you can find more information about this subject and workshops on my website. Check out the description to this video. You'll see a link to my website. You'll see a link to the materials that I use. You'll see a link to my Instagram page and other useful information.